Picture this. A 35-year-old soldier from one of the world's poorest nations just dismantled a rising American political star on live television, and the entire world stopped to watch. In 90 seconds of television that wasn't supposed to matter, Ibrahim Traoré did something unprecedented. He made America blink first. But here's what's shocking. He didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't even raise his voice. He simply asked 3 questions that no Western leader had an answer for. Questions so devastatingly simple that they ignited a continental awakening and sent shockwaves through the corridors of power from Washington to Brussels. Why did a quiet exchange between a Burkinabe president and a Republican congresswoman break the internet in 5 languages? How did 90 seconds of television trigger protests from Lagos to Nairobi? And what does this tell us about a seismic shift that's been decades in the making? The answer reveals a truth so powerful that it's reshaping the entire relationship between Africa and the West. Let's find out. It was supposed to be routine. Another panel discussion on Global Affairs Network where Western experts would discuss Africa's future while African voices provided convenient background noise. Caroline Leavitt, the sharp-tongued rising star of the Republican Party, sat perfectly framed by an American flag, her confidence radiating through the screen. Across the split screen, President Ibrahim Traoré appeared calm and unmoved and simple. Olive fatigues. No elaborate backdrop, no theatrical staging. Just a man who had already decided he was done playing by their rules. When the anchor asked for Leavitt's response to claims that U.S. presence in Africa creates dependency, she leaned forward with the kind of practiced authority that had made her a conservative media darling. "Let's be honest," she said, her voice sharp with conviction. "Without America, Africa doesn't have the tools to fight terrorism, stabilize governments, or secure its own borders. We've saved lives, built schools, fought extremists." She paused, satisfied with herself. President Traoré should thank us. The silence that followed lasted exactly 4.7 seconds. Long enough for the entire dynamic to shift. Traoré didn't blink. He didn't smile. He didn't even adjust his posture. He simply said, "Thank you for what? For military bases we didn't ask for? For funding tied to ideology? For drone strikes in villages you can't even pronounce?" The anchor stuttered. Leavitt bristled. "We're offering stability, Mr. President." "No," Traoré cut in, his voice low but surgical in its precision. "You're offering a leash and calling it a shield." What happened next changed everything. The studio fell into the kind of suffocating silence that makes viewers lean into their screens. Leavitt composed herself, clearly believing she could regain control through sheer force of will. "Do you honestly believe Africa can defend itself without American intelligence and military aid?" "Yes," he replied without hesitation. "Because America's presence doesn't secure us, it makes us a target." Then came the moment that would be replayed millions of times across every continent. Traoré leaned in just slightly, just enough to make it clear he was done being polite. "Tell me, Miss Leavitt," he said, each word deliberate and devastating. "How many wars has Africa brought to your soil?" Silence. "How many drones have we sent to your sky?" "Nothing." "How many sanctions have we imposed on your elections?" Her lips parted. Nothing came out. "If security is what you offer," Traoré continued, "then perhaps we'd be safer without it." In the control room, producers whispered, this wasn't supposed to go viral. Too late. Within an hour, "You're offering a leash and calling it a shield" was trending in 5 languages. Because the world had witnessed something rare. Africa didn't just ask. Africa answered by the time the broadcast ended. The digital explosion had already begun. TikTok remixes, Twitter quotes, Telegram reposts. Traoré's words hit the internet like a cultural grenade. Even in Washington, aides to Caroline Leavitt exchanged nervous looks as her camp scrambled to reframe the moment. Strong American leadership is always misunderstood by anti-Western forces, one spokesperson told Fox News. But the narrative was already slipping through their fingers like sand. In Nairobi, a university professor tweeted, Caroline Leavitt's mistake wasn't arrogance. It was assuming that Africa had forgotten how to answer back. In Lagos, a popular podcast played the audio on loop. "Tell me, Miss Leavitt, how many wars has Africa brought to your soil?" That silence echoed louder than any argument ever could. But what made this moment truly explosive wasn't just what Traoré said, it was how he said it. No anger, no theatrical gestures, no desperate attempts to win points. Just calm, devastating. Clarity from a man who had already decided he didn't need their approval. In Ouagadougou, Traoré's cabinet urged restraint. "You've made your point," said one minister. "Don't escalate." Traoré was unmoved. "I'm not escalating," he said. "She brought the fight to our doorstep. I simply didn't bow." That's where this gets interesting. Caroline Leavitt wasn't about to let a minor African leader embarrass her on the world stage. She scheduled a follow-up appearance, this time on a network where she controlled the narrative. Her face stern, her voice clipped with authority, she delivered her counterattack. "He's deflecting from Africa's own instability," she declared. "We've been the single greatest force for peace and development on the continent." But then something unprecedented happened. The show's own fact-checker interrupted her, live on air. "Respectfully, Congresswoman, dozens of civilian deaths have occurred in US-backed drone operations in Africa over the past decade." Leavitt blinked. That's classified military context. But the audience had heard enough. The host interjected, and suddenly Leavitt found herself in the same position as her African counterpart had been just days before, defending the indefensible. Meanwhile, across the ocean, graffiti appeared on a cement wall in Mali. "We don't need bullets to speak truth." In Ghana, student groups planned a forum titled Security or Subjugation. And in Burkina Faso, Traoré gave a short press statement that would become a rallying cry. "We have nothing against the American people, but when their leaders speak, we will no longer remain silent." Before we dive deeper into what happened, next, I want to take a moment to acknowledge something incredible. This community, our community, has grown to over 2.3 million people from every continent, all united by a simple belief that truth-telling matters more than power protecting. Every day, you share stories that mainstream media ignores. You ask questions that make uncomfortable people squirm. You refuse to accept that the way things are is the way things have to be. You're not just subscribers, you're co-conspirators in a global awakening. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because what we're building here is bigger than any single video. We're creating a space where African voices aren't just heard, they're amplified. Where truth isn't just spoken, it's weaponized against systems that depend on our silence. Now, let's get back to how one man's refusal to bow his head became a continental revolution. What happened next revealed the true power of Traoré's words. It wasn't just about winning a debate, it was about permission. For decades, African leaders had been taught to speak softly in the presence of Western power, to accept aid with gratitude, to frame their independence as partnership. Traoré shattered that script. In Tanzania, a young activist named Amara Cohn started a social media campaign with a simple premise. They said we needed them. We said not anymore. The hashtag not anymore spread like wildfire across the continent. In Senegal, a columnist wrote, "He didn't just reject her message, he rejected her authority to deliver it." In Cameroon, young activists created a campaign with one slogan: "Our land, our terms." But the real earthquake was happening in rooms where cameras couldn't reach. At a private fundraiser in Texas, Leavitt tried to pivot. "Africa has great potential, but we can't allow hostile voices to shape the narrative." Someone in the crowd asked, "Is wanting independence hostile?" She fumbled the response. "I mean anti-American voices, you know, ones that..." The moment went viral again. Not because of what she said, but because she couldn't explain why Africa wanting its own voice made her so uncomfortable. In Ouagadougou, Traoré met with students under a mango tree. No cameras, no press, just a leader listening to his people. "Are you worried about backlash?" one asked. He smiled slightly. "There's no backlash when you never leaned on them to begin with." "But she's powerful," another student said. "So is a storm," he replied. "But I've never seen a storm change the mountain." This wasn't just political theater, it was a masterclass in power dynamics. Traoré understood something that Western leaders had forgotten. True strength doesn't need to announce itself. It simply refuses to bend. While Caroline Leavitt was scheduling press conferences and damage control sessions, Traoré was building something far more dangerous to the established order: alternative systems that didn't require Western approval. Leavitt's next move was strategic. She released a polished video titled, "Why Africa Still Needs Us," a masterpiece of soft power propaganda featuring slow-motion clips of American soldiers delivering food aid, teachers volunteering in clinics, girls holding U.S.-donated textbooks. Her narration was smooth as silk. For decades, America has stood with Africa in war, in disease, in development. Without us, chaos fills the void. But something had fundamentally shifted. Traoré's people watched, in silence. Then they watched again, and again. By the fourth viewing, one Burkinabe official muttered, "They filmed themselves helping, but never asked who we were before they arrived." In Nigeria, a political analyst dissected the video on a panel show. What Caroline Levitt offers is not partnership, it's permission. America builds, but only if you obey. And if you don't, you're unstable. When asked for comment, Traoré didn't respond with a statement. He called a press conference, brief, direct, devastating. "Africa has never been a blank page," he said, "but they treat us like one, as if nothing meaningful existed until they arrived with pen and ink." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "We don't need their permission to exist with dignity." That phrase, "we don't need their permission," became the unofficial motto of a movement that was spreading far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. But what happened next would test whether words could truly become weapons. Back in Washington, the pressure was building. Even conservative outlets began asking uncomfortable questions. Is America offering aid or authority? When Levitt fired back on a podcast, "I will not apologize for American values," the host pushed gently. "But must others accept your values to receive your help?" She didn't answer, not because she didn't have one, but because every answer she gave now felt like proof of Traoré's point. Meanwhile, the symbols of resistance were multiplying. In Bamako, a young student held up a cardboard sign. "Aid with conditions is just a new colonizer with better PR." In Dar es Salaam, a mural appeared overnight. Traoré standing tall with the words, "We didn't ask for your light, we're not in the dark." But the real shift was happening in policy rooms and diplomatic circles. African leaders who had once competed for Western attention were now coordinating African-centered solutions. They weren't just rejecting Western aid, they were proving they didn't need it. The next flashpoint wasn't a speech, it was a leaked email. An internal memo from Caroline Levitt's office, never meant for public eyes, outlined a strategy to reframe African dissent as misinformation backed by rival states. The language was clinical, chilling. When figures like Traoré gained traction, we must link their messaging to anti-Western influence campaigns. Avoid direct confrontation. Use think tanks to seed doubts about their legitimacy. When it hit the press, the response was immediate and global. In Burkina Faso, the government's official account posted just one sentence: "If truth becomes threat, perhaps the threat isn't ours." Across Africa, the memo became a symbol not just of American overreach, but of something deeper, the fear of a continent that speaks for itself. Levitt attempted damage control on morning TV, her smile tight with strain. "The memo does not reflect my personal views, but it came from your chief of staff," the host pressed. "That doesn't mean I endorse every phrasing. You endorse the mindset." That clip went viral too, because by now, the world had learned to see through the careful language of power. Meanwhile, Traoré remained unmoved. He gave no dramatic press conferences, no inflammatory statements. He simply continued his work, opening new local development hubs, funding regional security through African coalitions, building systems that didn't require Western approval. When a reporter asked if he planned to respond to the leaked memo, he said simply, "Words that defeat themselves need no response." That phrase became legendary because it captured something profound. The West's own contradictions were becoming their greatest weakness. In Tanzania, a university auditorium erupted in cheers when a student closed her speech with, "The leash is off, and they're afraid of how far we'll run." On a campus wall in Accra, someone spray painted, "She said we needed them." We answered, but this was about more than symbols. In Ethiopia, a parliamentarian captured the moment perfectly. It's not anti-American, it's post-American. The annual Global Partnership Forum in Geneva opened with typical fanfare, flags, cameras, delegates smiling for photo ops. Caroline Levitt was the keynote speaker, stepping up to the podium with the kind of confidence that had once intimidated opponents. In uncertain times, she declared, one thing remains constant: American leadership. Where we go, freedom follows. The applause was polite but scattered. Something had shifted in the room, and everyone could feel it, because across the ocean, in a field without marble floors or polished spotlights, Ibrahim Traoré was standing before thousands. No teleprompter, no handlers, just him and his people. They say freedom follows them, he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. But freedom is not a parade, it's a fire, and we light it ourselves. The crowd didn't applaud, they roared back. In Geneva, reporters asked Levitt, how do you respond to the growing wave of African leaders rejecting U.S. aid frameworks? She offered the same tired line, aid is not control, it's compassion. But outside the forum, a protester held up a sign that captured the new reality. You can't give what you won't let go of. Traoré, now back in Ouagadougou, released a final statement, quiet, devastating, complete. Africa isn't rising because it's funded. It's rising because it's finished being told what it is. And then, silence. No gloating, no victory laps, no dramatic finale. Because the point had already been made. Caroline Levitt had come to represent more than a country. She had come to represent a mindset. The mindset that power gives you the right to speak for others, that aid creates obligation, that strength means making others weak. What she hadn't realized was that the world had learned to outgrow that mindset. And they didn't need permission. In a classroom in Burkina Faso, a teacher wrote one sentence on the board. They said we needed them. We said not anymore. A student raised her hand. Is that a quote? The teacher smiled. No. History. This wasn't about one man or one woman. It was about a continent standing up, not with rage, but with memory, with clarity, with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing who you are. Traoré didn't just offer resistance. He offered something far more powerful, a mirror that reflected decades of control dressed as compassion, a mirror that shattered the illusion that help, when conditional, is anything but soft power. And when Africa looked in that mirror, it saw something the West had spent centuries trying to make it forget, that it had never needed permission to exist with dignity. The conversation has changed forever. The questions are different now. The answers belong to Africa. And for the first time in a long time, the world is listening. The silence is broken. The leash is off. And the most powerful thing you can do right now is amplify these voices that refuse to be ignored. Share this story. Question the narratives you've been told. Ask who benefits when entire continents are told they need saving. Because Ibrahim Traoré didn't just speak for Burkina Faso, he spoke for everyone who's tired of being told they need permission to stand tall. The conversation is just beginning. Make sure you're part of it. Hit subscribe. Hit the bell. And remember, the most dangerous thing you can do to systems built on silence is refuse to be quiet. What will you do with your voice?